Okay, let's unpack this. We're taking a deep dive into Pier Paolo Pasolini. If you've heard the name, maybe it's because of his incredibly difficult final film, Salò, or maybe his poetry, novels. Or maybe you just know he was this hugely controversial figure, constantly getting into trouble.
He really did defy easy labels. I mean, a filmmaker, yes, definitely, but also a poet, a novelist, essayist, painter, actor, a political provocateur. He used pretty much every artistic tool he could find to challenge the world around him. He wasn't just creating art. He was, like, wielding it as a weapon sometimes.
Exactly. And that's why he's such a fascinating and, yeah, infuriating, but also utterly brilliant figure from the 20th century. We've pulled together a lot of insight into his life, his work, and our mission today is really to find those surprising facts, cut through some of the noise, and understand why this guy, this multifaceted genius, still feels so relevant, especially through his films.
Yeah, get ready for a journey that's anything but ordinary, which honestly is the only way to approach Pasolini.
So, right off the bat, what's the first thing you need to grasp about Pasolini? It's that calling him just a filmmaker,
Yep.
it's just laughably incomplete.
Oh, absolutely. It doesn't even come close. Before he even stepped behind a camera, he was a recognized poet. You've got works like The Ashes of Gramsci that got him serious literary attention. He wrote these searing novels, Boys of Life, for instance, really giving voice to the kids in Rome's toughest slums, the Borgate.
Right, Borgate.
And his essays, wow, they were like dynamite, taking direct aim at Italy's post-war transformation. What he saw as this soul-crushing materialism taking over consumerism.
He wasn't just observing, was he? He was right in there, putting his perspective out with zero filter. And this tells you a lot. He faced 33 trials in his lifetime. 33. For things like blasphemy, obscenity.
Exactly. That tells you everything you need to know. This wasn't someone aiming for, polite academic debate. He was there to detonate things, to shake things up.
A one-person renaissance, but with, what was it, Marxist grit. That sums it up well.
It really does. And while all his work was potent, his films, they eventually became his loudest megaphone, his most powerful platform.
And that's what we really want to focus on today, how his cinema became this incredibly loud voice. Italy back then, mid-20th century, it was changing so fast, leaving its agricultural past behind, becoming this shiny, consumer-driven society.
And Pasolini's films just screamed resistance to that. They championed the forgotten, the marginalized, they critiqued capitalism, they fearlessly explored faith, sex, power, in ways that were just, well, unprecedented, really.
His films took everything he was already writing about, thinking about his poetry, his politics, and just blasted it onto the big screen, holding that mirror up to society's underbelly.
Yeah, blending poetry, politics, and often these scandalous juxtapositions.
Yeah.
Sacred and profane smashed together.
So where did this rebel come from? You have to look at his origins, right? Born in Bologna, March 5, 1922.
And the family life. Wow, complicated from the start. His father, Carlo Alberto, was a military officer. And, incredibly, a fascist. There's even a story he's credited with saving Mussolini's life at one point. Imagine those family dinners later on.
Seriously, with his son becoming this outspoken Marxist?
Yeah.
So intense.
Totally. His mother, Susanna Calusi, she was a school teacher. Seems like she was a really key figure,
Yeah.
nurturing his artistic side early on.
They moved around a lot, didn't they? Following his father's postings, Conegliano, Belluno,
Yeah.
Casartedele,
Caserta, yeah. And here's a surprising little fact. It was in Caserta when he was just 7 years old.
7.
7. Inspired by Rimbaud, apparently he started writing poetry. 7 years old, crafting verses.
That's incredible. Just shows the prodigious talent right from the beginning.
Oh, clearly. And by his teens, he was just devouring literature.
Yeah.
Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Shakespeare,
Yeah.
forming literary groups. But also, and this is so Pasolini, balancing that intense intellectual life with a real passion for football.
That combination again, the intellectual and the physical, the grounded.
Exactly. Then he goes off to the University of Bologna, studies literature, art history, and, crucially, encounters Professor Roberto Longhi,
Ah, Longhi. Why was he so important?
because Longhi introduced him to the power of Renaissance painters. Giotto, Masaccio, the visual language, that love for vivid, expressive, almost raw visual storytelling.
Yeah.
It fundamentally shaped the look and feel of his films later. You can see it.
And alongside all this intellectual development, there's this immense inner struggle, isn't there? Grappling with his homosexuality.
In such a deeply conservative Catholic society at the time.
Yeah.
He kept it hidden for years, apparently, behind this tough intellectual front.
That internal conflict. I mean, think about it. A gay, Marxist, Catholic-raised poet in fascist Italy. He seems almost destined to challenge norms.
It's an explosive combination, isn't it? You can see how it fueled so much of his work.
And here's where it gets really interesting for our focus today. Despite being known globally for his cinema, he didn't actually start directing until he was, what, nearly 40?
It's true. Almost 40. He spent years learning the ropes, basically, writing screenplays for other directors, including, famously, co-writing Fellini's Nights at Cabiria back in '57.
So he was already deep in the film world, just not calling the shots yet.
Exactly. Then came his own directorial debut, Accattone, 1961. And what a debut.
Tell us about it. What world did he choose to show us first?
He plunged headfirst right back into those Borgate, the slum neighborhoods outside Rome, filled with pimps, thieves, people living right on the edge. The style, it was definitely rooted in Italian neorealism, non-professional actors shooting on location, that raw authenticity.
But it wasn't just documentary, right? He added his own spin.
Oh, completely. He added this lyrical quality. He found this profound dignity and almost sacred feeling in these characters, turning these lowlifes, as society saw them, into something like, well, Christ-like figures.
That's a startling insight into his vision, isn't it? Finding holiness in the most ignored places.
Absolutely. It's pure Pasolini. There's that moment.
Uh-huh.
The protagonist, Vittorio, the pimp, he dies after a motorcycle crash, and his last words are just, now I'm fine. There's such a strange, tragic poetry there.
And the music, using Bach's St. Matthew's Passion during a street brawl.
I know. It's audacious, isn't it? Blending the most sublime, sacred music with this gritty, profane reality. Was it genius? Was it totally bonkers? Probably both.
And it caused a massive scandal, of course.
Of course it did. Pasolini never did safe. Never. His follow-up, Mama Roma, in 1962, continued exploring similar territory.
Starring the icon Anna Magnani.
Yes. She plays a former prostitute, trying desperately to build a respectable life for her son. It's just this heartbreaking fight for dignity against impossible odds.
Magnani's performance is just incredible in that, so raw.
So powerful. Pasolini himself apparently felt later it was maybe a bit too close to Accattone in some ways, but it still packed a huge punch. It really cemented his focus on the struggles of the marginalized.
Which leads us, I suppose, to what many people consider his absolute masterpiece, the Gospel, according to St. Matthew from 1964.
And here's maybe the most surprising insight into Pasolini. An atheist, a Marxist, made what many consider the most powerful, most respected film about Jesus ever.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. How did he approach it?
He shot in the stark landscapes of southern Italy. Again, using non-professional actors, mostly locals. It creates this deeply reverent but totally unsentimental, un-Hollywood portrayal of Jesus' life.
So how did his own background, being an atheist from a Catholic country, shape how he saw Jesus?
Well, despite his lack of faith, he grew up immersed in Catholicism. He understood its power, its symbols. But he depicted Jesus not as this gentle, ethereal figure, but as fierce, almost revolutionary, railing against hypocrisy with this energy that feels, I don't know, almost like punk rock fire, decades before punk.
He saw Jesus as a radical challenger of the status quo.
Absolutely. And the dialogue, he took it directly from the Gospel of Matthew, which gives it this incredible authenticity. But the soundtrack, that's where it gets really interesting again.
What did he do there? More Bach.
Bach, yes, but mixed with gospel music and the raw, powerful blues of Odetta. It's this incredible fusion. It's like he took that influence from Longhi, the Renaissance painting look, and scored it with sounds from across history, across cultures. Sacred, vernacular. It shouldn't work maybe, but it does, powerfully.
And the ultimate irony, this guy constantly battling blasphemy charges.
Gets critical acclaim and a nod from the Vatican for his film about Jesus. It's the ultimate Pasolini paradox, isn't it?
It really is. It says so much about the film's sheer artistic integrity, its spiritual depth, regardless of the director's personal belief.
Absolutely. It transcended all of that.
Okay, so moving into the 1970s, Pasolini took another fascinating turn. After the intensity of gospel, it seems like he wanted to, I don't know, have some fun, inject some joy back in.
He absolutely did. This period gives us the famous Trilogy of Life, the Decameron in '71, the Canterbury Tales in '72, and Arabian Nights in '74.
And these are, quite different from Accattone or Gospel. People often call them a medieval party with extra spice.
That's a pretty good description. They're based on these classic literary works, Boccaccio, Chaucer. And they are full of bawdy humor, explicit sexuality, a real sense of, earthy, communal joy.
Pasolini even pops up in them himself, doesn't he?
He does, almost like a cheeky narrator winking at the audience. You see him painting a fresco in the Decameron, appearing as Chaucer in Canterbury Tales.
So what was he trying to capture with this shift, this move towards more lighthearted, they're still very explicit stories?
There's a really deep insight here, I think. He saw these medieval and pre-modern stories as celebrating a kind of vitalism, a joy in sex, laughter, community, things he felt were being stamped out by consumer capitalism.
So it was a reaction against that homologation he was always writing about.
Exactly. They feel like a kind of love letter to a world where people found richness in simple pleasures, in shared stories, before mass media and consumer culture flattened everything out. A world without smartphones, you could say.
So even when he was having fun, there was still a serious critique embedded in there.
Always with Pasolini.
Yeah.
Always. Even in all the ribaldry and the naked bodies, he's subtly highlighting class dynamics, critiquing power structures. His appearances kind of remind you he's guiding this. It's not just a random romp, it's a deliberate exploration.
And then the most stark contrast imaginable. If the trilogy was playful, even joyous in its way, Salò, or The 120 Days of Sodom, released in 1975, that was a terrifying plunge into darkness.
It's a brutal film. There's just no other way to put it. He adapted the Marquis de Sade's infamous book, but crucially, he set it in the dying days of fascist Italy during the Republic of Salò.
Creating this harrowing allegory.
Exactly. An allegory for the ultimate abuses of power, the dehumanizing effects of absolute authority, of treating people as objects. He linked fascism directly to this extreme Sadean worldview.
The content is, well, it's notoriously difficult to watch. Four libertines systematically torturing a group of young victims in this isolated villa, graphically depicting the extremes of sadism and degradation.
And the crucial insight here, the reason he made it, wasn't just to shock people, though it certainly does that. He was using this extreme, almost unbearable premise to expose what he saw as the logical endpoint of unchecked power, of consumerism reducing everything, even human bodies, to commodities.
It's like staring into an abyss.
It really is. It's necessary, maybe, for understanding his final desperate warnings about where society was heading, but it is a deeply, deeply unpleasant viewing experience.
Its reception was, understandably, explosive. Called pornographic by some, profound art by others, banned in numerous countries.
And the timing.
Yep.
Chilling. He finished Salò just before he was murdered. Its release sparked outrage, huge debate. Was it a final middle finger? A desperate warning about cruelty and dehumanization. It cemented his reputation as someone who would never, ever compromise, no matter how dark the vision got.
Yeah. And just to be clear for anyone listening, Salò is not your average movie night pick,
Right.
unless existential dread is your idea of cozy.
Definitely not.
So moving beyond the camera for a moment, it's so important to remember, yeah, the films were his loudest voice, maybe, but his other work, his writing, was absolutely foundational.
Oh, completely. His poetry,
Yeah.
often written in the Friulian dialect from his mother's region, is incredibly personal. Celebrating his mother, rural life, but also wrestling constantly with his identity, his sexuality. His novels, like Violent Life, kept exploring the struggles of those kids in the Borgate, and his essays, relentlessly railing against homologation.
That idea again, that consumerism and mass culture were just flattening everything out, erasing local differences, authentic values. It feels incredibly prescient today, doesn't it?
Eerily so. He saw it coming, and he was just this mass of walking contradictions, which is what makes him endlessly fascinating.
Right, a Marxist who famously sided with the working class police against the privileged student protesters in '68.
An atheist who makes this incredibly revered film about Jesus.
An openly gay man who was also quite critical of aspects of the gay liberation movement at the time.
These weren't just inconsistencies, though. They were part of his complex, restless, constantly questioning mind. He refused easy answers, easy alignments.
He also developed this theory, cinema of poetry.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that a little? It sounds quite dense.
It is a bit dense, but the core idea is fascinating. He didn't see film as just telling stories about reality. He saw film as capturing the raw language of reality itself. Like, reality has its own signs, its own poetry.
Okay.
And for him, the act of editing film was profound. It was like imposing form onto this raw reality. He even compared editing to death, in a way cutting life into meaningful fragments.
Wow, that's deep.
It really is. And it had a significant impact on major thinkers, philosophers, semioticians, people like Roland Barthes, Gilles Deleuze. They engaged seriously with his ideas about film language.
Yeah.
He wasn't just making movies. He was genuinely contributing to how we think about movies, about reality itself.
So his legacy just keeps echoing, influencing filmmakers like Bertolucci, Nanni Moretti.
His ideas are still studied, debated, His films are constantly reissued, shown in retrospectives like the big one at Roma. And those warnings about consumerism, cultural loss, they just feel incredibly relevant now.
Which brings us, inevitably, tragically, to his end, the mystery surrounding his death.
Yeah. His body was found on Ostia Beach near Rome, November 2nd, 1975. He'd been brutally beaten and then run over by his own car.
The official story settled quickly on Pino Pelosi, a 17-year-old hustler he'd picked up. Pelosi confessed, then later recanted.
But suspicion has always swirled around that official narrative. Was it just a trick gone wrong? Was it a planned homophobic attack? Was it a political assassination because he knew too much or was about to expose something? Theories involving neo-fascists, organized crime like the Banda della Magliana, they've persisted for decades.
The truth just remains frustratingly elusive, doesn't it?
It does, and it's chillingly eerie that his very last interview, published just after his death, was titled, "We Are All in Danger." He was warning about this corrupt, violent undercurrent in Italian society.
His death at 53 was just this massive shock, a huge loss for Italian culture, for world cinema. Abel Ferrara made that film, Pasolini, with Willem Dafoe.
Yeah, capturing those final days, it's intense. But it's important, I think, while acknowledging the tragedy and the mystery, not to let the murder overshadow the art.
Right. He'd probably hate that. He'd say, forget the drama, watch my movies, read my poems.
Exactly. Engage with the work.
So, circling back to where we started, why is he most remembered as a filmmaker, despite being this polymath, this poet, novelist, painter?
Well, ultimately, I think it's about reach. His films simply reached the widest audience, internationally. While his poetry and novels are vital, particularly in Italy, cinema was the medium that really broke through globally. It allowed him to synthesize all his interests, literature, art history, politics, social critique, into one powerful, accessible visual experience.
You think about the Gospel, according to St. Matthew, still hailed worldwide, even with that Vatican nod paradox.
Or Salò. As difficult as it is, it remains this unavoidable reference point for cinematic transgression, for confronting uncomfortable truths. Even the trilogy brought these classic medieval tales to modern audiences in a really provocative way.
So film was the most potent way for him to blend his intellectual ideas with that raw visual language he loved, rooted in painting, rooted in observing reality.
Yeah, it hit hard, and it stayed with people. It was his loudest, most impactful megaphone in a world that was changing incredibly fast.
So while calling him only a filmmaker is definitely woefully incomplete.
Like calling Da Vinci just a painter.
Exactly. His films were arguably the most resonant part of that extraordinary, complicated, challenging voice.
They were the culmination in many ways.
So wrapping this up, what does it all mean for us today? Pier Paolo Pasolini. He was this absolute force of nature, wasn't he? A contradictory genius who used every single tool he had to provoke, to challenge, to make us see the world and its power structures completely differently.
And his deep dives into society's underbelly, his critiques of consumerism, of hypocrisy, of the way culture gets flattened out, they still resonate so powerfully. It's almost unsettling how current he feels sometimes.
He wasn't here to make things easy for us. Definitely not. He was here to make us uncomfortable, to make us question, to feel deeply, and maybe most importantly, to think critically.
Yeah, perhaps the biggest takeaway is just the sheer power of an individual voice, even one full of paradoxes, maybe because it was full of paradoxes. A voice unafraid to relentlessly challenge the status quo through just fierce, multidisciplinary creativity.
This deep dive into his world, his work, hopefully it gives you a shortcut, a way into understanding the man and his incredibly potent, often difficult message.
And maybe a final thought, if we connect this to the bigger picture. What would Pasolini make of our world right now?
Oh, wow.
Our social media saturation, our algorithm shaping what we see, our hyper-consumerism. Would he see the same old power structures just wearing new clothes? Would he find new, maybe even more insidious forms of that homologation he feared?
That is definitely something to mull over. Go explore his work. It's challenging, it can be difficult, but it is absolutely worth the dive.